Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today we are going to start discussing about artificial neural network, and here we will first introduce what is a neural network and how it is inspired from human brain, and then we will introduce the different artificial neural network architectures. Okay, and we have already studied about the learning methods like supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning. So we will skip this part, the learning methods, and some of the topics from learning rule on supervised learning. So we will study like gradient descent, okay, generalized delta rule, error correction method, and then we will talk about feed forward neural network with gradient descent optimization. Okay, so what is a neural network? So if I ask you this question, what is neural network, then we need to understand how it is inspired from human brain. Okay, so uh, informally, what we understand about neural network is that the neural network reflect the behavior of human brain. Okay, and it can allow the computer programs to learn about the patterns. It recognizes patterns. Okay, and it can also solve the problems which are commonly found in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. So neural networks are also known as artificial neural networks and simulated neural networks. Okay, and these neural networks are considered as a subset of machine learning, and it is also the heart of deep learning neural networks. So, if I consider the human brain, so human brain has the ability to perform different tasks such as pattern recognition, perception, then motor control. So, much faster than any computer. So, if I compare the human brain with a computer CPU, then we can understand that the human brain has the ability more than that of the computer CPU to perform the different tasks. Okay. Now, here are some facts about human brain. So, if we see these facts, then we can understand that the capacity of human brain is more than that of any computer system. It may be a supercomputer, it may be a standalone computer. If we consider the computer CPU with human brain, then we can see that the capacity of human brain is much more than that of computer system. So here the brain contains about 10 to the power 10 basic units which are called neurons. Okay, and here each neuron is connected to about 10 to the power 4 other neurons. So if I consider a single neuron in the human brain, then we can see that here single neuron is connected to other neurons which is about 10 to the power 4. Okay, so this much of neurons are connected with each neuron. Now, at the time of birth, the human brain weighed 0.3 kg, and now if I consider the human brain of adult, then the weight may be 1.5, around 1.5 kg. And if I consider the power consumption of human brain, then 20 to 40 watt. So 20% of the body consumption. And here the signal propagation speed inside the axon is about 90 90 meter per second. So it is about 1,70,000 kilometer of axon length for adult male. Okay, and if I consider the firing frequency of a neuron, then 250 to 2000 hertz, and the operating temperature is about 37 plus minus 2 degrees centigrade. Okay, so these are the different facts about the human brain. And if we consider the facts about some standalone computer or supercomputer, then we can see that the different if I consider the different aspects of the computer system, then we can see that uh, the capacity of human brain is much more than that of computer system. Now if I look at the biological neuron, then in biological neuron we can see there are some parts which are integrated with the biological neuron. So here we can see the cell body, or which is also called the soma. Okay, so this is the nucleus of the neuron. It processes the information or process the input. Okay, so we can also see the dendrites. So dendrites are long irregular shaped filament attached to the soma. Okay, so this is also known as input channels through which the information flows. Okay, and we can also see the axon. So this axon is another type of link which is attached to the soma or cell body. Okay, this is also called the output channels. Okay, now output of the axon, this voltage pulse, which is also known as the spike, that lasts for a millisecond. Okay, and firing of neuron, which is also known as the membrane potential. Okay, so if I consider the membrane potential, then we will see what is the firing capacity of a neuron. An axon here terminates in a specialized contact which is called the synaptic junction. The electrochemical contact which is done between neurons through this synaptic junction. The size of synapses are believed to be linked with learning. So when the learning happens, so these synapses carry the electrochemical information between neurons. So on the right hand side here you can see the image of a biological neuron. So, and these are the different parts of the neuron: soma, dendrites, axon, output of the axon, firing of neuron, okay, synapses. So these are the different parts of a neuron. Now, how this biological neuron can be compared with the neuron in the artificial neural network? So that we can design, which is inspired from the human brain. Now, if I consider the first such kind of artificial neuron model, then we can see that McCulloch-Pitts, this McCulloch-Pitts model was introduced in the 1943. So here you can see the year is written 1949, which is not correct. The correct year of introduction of McCulloch-Pitts model is 1943. Okay. Now uh, what this model does? So why this model was introduced? So the function of this model basically mimics the neurons, biological neurons of the human brain. Okay, so here the firing and strength of the existing signal are controlled by activation functions. So okay, so here if you see the model, McCulloch-Pitts model, then you can see that there are inputs, there are components comparable to synapses, and there is an aggregation unit, or we can say the summation unit, and here you can see the another unit comparable to cell body or soma. Okay, so basically this unit is responsible for limiting or thresholding the function. Okay, and here you can see another unit. So apart from this input synapses, aggregation unit, and this cell body, so another unit can be found, so which is comparable to axon. So that is basically it generates the output, which is denoted by yj. So here here in this model, the inputs are denoted by x1 to xn. Okay, so and here wj1 to wjn are nothing but the weights. Okay, nothing but the weights, and here the inputs are aggregated, or we can say that this aggregation unit is responsible for obtaining the linear combination of inputs and the weights. Okay, and this theta j, this phi this theta j is responsible to provide the bias. That means this theta j is bias, nothing but the bias. Okay, or we can say the some kind of offset which is also provided to this aggregation unit. And when this aggregation unit generates the output as a linear combination of weights and inputs, then this cell body or the unit which is responsible to transform the output of the aggregation to another output, which is denoted by yj. Okay, so the input of this unit, or we can say the activation function, is uj, and output of this activation function is yj. Okay, and this is the final output which is comparable to the action. So this output may be provided as input to some other neuron. So here we are talking about a single neuron. So this McCulloch-Pitts model is basically built on a single neuron, and this single neuron is provided by this input, n number of inputs, and this theta j is nothing but the bias or offset, and this sigma represent the aggregation of inputs, weighted inputs, and this provides the linear combination of inputs and weights. Okay, and here uj is the output from the aggregation unit, and this input is provided provided to the activation function. So activation function can be compared with the cell body or soma. Okay, which is responsible to transform the output which is generated from the uh, aggregation unit to another output. Okay, and this another output which is denoted by yj. So if I generate a mathematical model from this McCulloch-Pitts model, which is built on a single neuron, then we can have this type of equation that we can obtain. Okay, so here yj equals to, here yj equals to so this is nothing but the transformation function or the activation function. Okay, and this is the summation over yji xi plus this is theta j. Okay, and I varies from 1 to n. That means for n number of inputs there will be n number of weights. Okay, and this is the linear combination. So we take the summation over the linear combination of input and weight, and this to be added to the bias. So bias is added to this summation over linear combination of input and weights. Okay, and over this we apply this activation function. We apply the activation function so that we can get the output in the transform form. So activation function may be anything. So it may be linear, it may be step, it may be ramp, it may be sigmoid, it may be hyperbolic tangent, it may be Gaussian activation function. Now, what are the different types of neural networks that we can see in the different applications? So first of all, we can start from single layer neural networks. So in the single layer, if we consider the single layer neural network, then we can see that a single layer neural network learns the linear functions, okay, such as Hopfield neural network. So Hopfield neural network is built on a single layer neural networks. So if we next our neural network type may be multi-layer feed forward neural network. So what is multi-layer feed forward neural network? So for example, the standard backpropagation neural network or functional link and production unit network. So these are the examples of different multi-layer feed forward neural network. So if I consider the multi-layer feed forward neural network, then we can see that multi-layer feed forward neural network basically learns the nonlinear functions. Okay, and so we can use the different activation functions so that it can learn the nonlinear functions and transform the output of aggregation unit to some another output. So basically this output is generated by learning the nonlinear functions. We can have the temporal neural networks such as Elmon Jordan simple recurrent neural networks. So as well as the time delay neural network. So these two are the examples of temporal neural networks. So temporal neural networks are uh, also known as the feedback neural networks. Then we can have the self-organizing neural networks, such as this Cohen self-organizing feature maps and the learning vector quantizer. So these two are the examples of self-organizing neural networks. Now, in the self-organizing neural network, the training process is performed by competitive learning. Okay, and these self-organizing neural networks are basically unsupervised learning technique. So by unsupervised learning technique, we can reduce the dimension of a feature set to a reduced dimension. Okay, and here the training is performed by competitive learning. So before we get to the activation function, so we can learn the features, or we can learn the examples by competitive learning, and then we can transform such reduced features to another output by activation function. And when we combine the feed-forward neural network and self-organizing neural network, then we can obtain the radial basis function neural networks. Okay, so basically here we combine the unsupervised and unsupervised neural networks, and we obtain radial basis function network. So this is a radial basis function neural network. This is a kind of hybrid network where we can see both supervised learning and unsupervised learning neural networks are combined together. Yes, single layer neural networks are supervised, multi-layer feed-forward neural networks are supervised learning techniques, temporal neural networks techniques are, or architectures are supervised learning techniques. But in case of self-organizing neural networks, these are the unsupervised learning techniques, and these unsupervised learning techniques are basically used to learn the patterns or learn the examples, and it discovers a new pattern, or it can generate the clusters, or it can reduce the dimension of the feature into some reduced dimension. Okay. So based on the different mechanism and the architecture of the networks, so we can have different types of neural network. Now, if I look at the applications of artificial neural networks, then we can see that artificial neural network has wide range of applications. Like in the classification, we can apply artificial neural network. So in classification, our aim is to predict the class level of the input vector or the input example. Okay. In pattern matching, our aim is to produce a pattern that best associated with a given input vector or input example. Okay, so here we take an unknown input example or unknown input vector. So we are trying to match this input vector or input example with the examples in the training data set. Okay, so basically here we are trying to match the two patterns which may be obtained from the single instance. Okay, or we can say the single examples. So if there are two instances of the same pattern, then we can try to match these two instances, and we will try to see whether these two instances from the same pattern or maybe different pattern are found to be matched or not. Then we can apply the artificial neural network for pattern completion. Now, what is pattern completion? So a pattern completion aims to complete the missing parts of a given input vector. Okay, so that means here if we see any pattern which is found to be incomplete, and then we can apply the pattern completion technique using artificial neural network, and we can fill up the gap, or we can complete the pattern for the experiment. Then we can apply the artificial neural network to optimization problems, and here the optimization problem aims to find the optimal values of the parameters in an optimization problem. We can also apply the artificial neural network to control system. That means here the appropriate action is taken based on the given an input vector. Okay, so we can apply the artificial neural network in control system. Then we can apply artificial neural network for function approximation or time series modeling. So in the when we apply the artificial neural network in function approximation, then we can see the learning of the here we can learn the functional relationships between input and desired output vectors. Artificial neural networks are also known as universal function approximator. That means we can use any nonlinear functions to approximate it. That means when we apply the artificial neural network for function approximations, so we can consider any nonlinear functions for approximation. We can also apply artificial neural networks in data mining. So it aims to discover the hidden patterns from the given data. Okay, which is also called the knowledge discovery. So we can also apply artificial neural networks for knowledge discovery from the given set of data. Now, if we look at different artificial neural network architectures, then firstly, we should know about the artificial neural networks, that the information which is conveyed by artificial neural network is about universal function approximator. So artificial neural network is considered as universal function approximators, and it can consider any nonlinear function for approximation. Now, if we look at the different architectures, so considering this universal function approximation capacity of artificial neural networks, so we can have different architectures, or we can we can design different architectures. So these architectures allow for the generation of functions of different complexity and power. That means we are not bound to use the single architecture. We can have different architectures, and this variety of architectures will allow us to generate the functions of different complexity and power. Okay, so initially we will consider three different types of artificial neural network architecture, and based on these three architectures, so we can generate or we can produce large number of architecture, so which will allow to generate the different which will allow to generate the functions of different complexity and capacity. So here we can see that there are three artificial neural network architectures that we can consider to generate other different types of architectures. So which are feed forward neural networks or feed forward networks, feedback networks, and lateral networks. Okay. Now, what is feed forward network? So when I use the feed forward term with artificial neural networks, then this basically denotes the flow of the information in forward direction. Okay, flow of the information in forward direction. So here the cycle here the connections between the neurons connection between the neurons does not create a directed cycle. Okay, so if we consider this network, then we can see here we have three different types of layers. Okay, so the first layer is called the input layer, the second layer is called the hidden layer, and finally we will have the output layer. So particularly if I consider these feed forward neural networks, then we can see here in the input layer we have two neurons. Okay, so these are the neurons, these are the single neurons. Okay, and here in the input layer we have two neurons, and the hidden layer we have five neurons. In the output layer we have one neuron. Okay, now here in the input layer we provide the input. So we will consider some example. Okay, so for pattern recognition, if I consider an example and or pattern, unknown pattern, then we will provide the feature vector which is obtained from that unknown pattern to this input layer. Okay, so basically this input layer is responsible for uh, uh, for uh, for providing the input to the network, and this these features will be conveyed to the hidden layers. So here the number of neurons in this layer basically correspond to the number of inputs to the network. Okay, and this layer will consist of passive nodes basically. So passive nodes means these passive nodes do not take part in the actual signal modification, but only it transmits the signal to the following layer. So if I consider the features are nothing but the signals. So this input layer or the neurons in the input layer are responsible to transmit the signal or transmit the feature to the next layer or the following layer. Okay, so here signal modification is not performed. So what the signal modification is performed? So signal modification is performed in the hidden layer. Okay, or you can consider in the output layer. So in the hidden layer has the arbitrary number of layers with arbitrary number of neurons. Okay, and the nodes in this layer take part in the signal modification. So hence they are called active. Neurons, or we can say these neurons are containing the activation functions. That means here if I consider a single neuron in the hidden layer, then we can divide the functionality of single neuron in the hidden layer into two parts. Okay, the first part is responsible for aggregation of the input, and the second part is responsible to transform the output of the aggregation to another output. Okay, and this when the another output is generated, the output is then transmitted to the output layer. Okay, so basically here we have two different functionalities in each neuron in the hidden layer. One is the aggregation, another is activation. Okay, and the output layer, in the output layer, the number of neurons in the output layer will correspond to the number of the output values of the neural network. Okay, and nodes in this layer are also active ones. So here if we consider that we are considering the patterns for classification, or the classification is the binary classification, then we can generate the output either positive or negative. So when the positive output will be generated, so some kind of continuous value will be generated. So that may infer the positive class, either the positive class or negative class. Okay, so when this infers the positive class, so that means here we need to have two different neurons in the output layer. So number of neurons in the output layer are not fixed. So if I consider or if I expect there will be one output, then we can consider one neuron in the output layer. But if we consider the multi-class classification problem, then we can have more than one neurons in the output layer. Okay, similarly we can consider any number of neurons in the hidden layer, but for this selection of neurons in the hidden layer, so we don't have any thumb rule. Okay, so we cannot there is no thumb rule for having the neurons in the hidden layer. Okay, so that we will discuss how we can select the neurons in the hidden layer. So that is the matter of considering the input neurons in the input layer. So based on the number of neurons in the input layer, so we can choose the number of neurons in the hidden layer. So what we are lacking here, that there is no thumb rule for selection of neurons in the hidden layer, but somehow we have to decide the number of neurons in the hidden layer. So that can be based on the neurons in the input layer. Okay, so we can add any number of hidden layers. Okay, so we can have any number of neurons in the hidden layer. So as I said, the based on the neurons in the input layer, so we can have the number of neurons in the hidden layer. So particularly if we see this feed forward neural network, so here we can have the network size n into m into r. Now what is n? N is the number of neurons in the input layer. What is m? M is the number of neurons in the hidden layer. And what is r? R is the number of neurons in the output layer. So particularly if I study this feed-forward networks, then we can have 2 into 5 into 1. Okay, so network size is 10 basically. Okay, now if I increase the hidden layer, so here we are having only one hidden layer, but if I consider more than one hidden layer, then obviously the network size will be changed. Okay, or network size will be found to be different. And here WMN is the input weight matrix. Okay, WNM is the input weight matrix, and WRM is the output weight matrix. Okay, so this output weight matrix will be combined with the output of the neurons of the hidden layer, and this WMN is the input weight matrix. This input weight matrix, or the weights in the input weight matrix, are combined with the inputs in the input layer. Okay, so we transmit the input features or the signals to the hidden layer. So in this hidden layer we get both the weight WMN and the input features for combining into aggregation unit. Okay, so here the no feedbacks are generated and no feedbacks are generated within the network. The coupling takes place from one layer to the next layer. The information the flows in general in the forward direction. So these are the different properties of feed forward neural networks. So here is an example of so this is a simple example of feed forward neural network. Now if I consider the feedback neural networks, then we can see in the feedback neural networks the connection between neurons generate a directed cyclic graph. Okay, directed cyclic graph. That means when we consider the input layer, neurons in the input layer, then and the connections between the input layer and the hidden layer, then we can see these are the different connections, and these connections generate the directed cyclic graph. Okay, or directed cycle. So that is why this is called the feedback networks. And the output of a neuron is either directly or indirectly fed back to its input via other linked neurons. Okay, and this is used in complex pattern recognition tasks like speech recognition. So this feedback neural networks can be used for pattern recognition tasks. So especially if I consider the speech recognition, then speech recognition problem can be implemented with this feedback neural networks. Now we will consider the lateral network. So what is lateral network? So if I consider this lateral neural network architecture, then we can see everything else is found to be same with feed forward neural network, but here is only one difference. What is the difference? The difference is the couplings of neurons within one layer. So if you see here, input layer, hidden layer, output layer, in the input layer, there is a connection which is found between the neurons. So here are two neurons in the input layer. So there is a connection between these two neurons, and this is directed connection. Okay, so from neuron 2 to neuron 1, there is a connection which is found to be directed. And if I consider the hidden layer, then we can see that there are three neurons in the hidden layer, and the connections are directed between the neurons in the hidden layer. Okay, similar to input layer and hidden layer, the neurons in the output layer are also found the connected, which is from one neuron to another neuron. So this is the only difference. So this coupling of neurons within the same layer will not be found in the feedback network as well as in the feed forward neural network. So this is the only difference in the architecture, so which differs from feed forward neural network as well as feedback neural networks. Okay, now so essentially there is no explicit feedback path amongst these different layers. So this can be thought as a compromise between the forward and feedback network. Okay, so this so basically here we achieve the uh, here we achieve uh, here we achieve the latent, or we can say the lateral network which is between the forward and feed forward network. So if I consider both the feed forward neural networks and feedback neural networks, then somehow this lateral networks is found in between feed forward neural networks and feedback neural network because of this couplings of neurons within the same layer. Now, what are the different learning methods that you can apply to artificial neural networks? So when we work with artificial networks, so artificial networks work through the optimized weight values. Okay, and the method by which the optimized weight values are attained is called learning. Okay, so basically, so here. Here you can see that when we combine when we combine the input and the weight by this linear combination of functions, then you can see here we are taking basically summation over this weights and input, okay, and plus theta j bias. Now this equation is found to be similar to the equation of the straight line. Okay, so in the straight line we have you observed that?
Yes, sir.
So in the equation of, so everything whenever whenever you will see some mathematical model built on artificial neural network, then you can see this kind of equation or this kind of model which is found to be similar to the formulation of straight line equation. So in the straight line equation we basically found y equals to mx plus c. Okay, now here m and c are comparable to w and theta j. So this model is similar to the straight line equation. So in the straight line equation, we basically determine the intercept and the slope, and here we have to determine the weight and bias. Okay, so we have to decide what will be the weight vector and what will be the bias. Okay. Now, how to determine the weight and bias? So if we fix the value of the bias, but for the weight value, initially we can start with some random weight vector, and then through learning we can optimize the weight values, and this optimization will give us the optimized weight values for learning. Okay, so when we will learn the artificial neural networks by training, then we can obtain the optimized weight values. So in the learning process we try to teach the network how to produce the output when the corresponding input is presented or corresponding input is provided. Okay, so basically here we are trying to produce the output when the input is provided to the network. So when the learning is complete, so when the trained neural network with the updated optimal weights should be able to produce the output within desired accuracy corresponding to the input pattern. Okay, so if I learn about if I learn about different learning methods, then we can have different types of learning methods. One is the supervised learning technique, unsupervised learning technique, and enforcement learning techniques. So we have already discussed about this learning methods, so we are not going to discuss these learning methods again, but we can have this classification of learning algorithms. So here you can see the supervised learning. This is basically the error based unsupervised learning. So in the unsupervised learning, we discover the pattern, we generate the clusters, or we reduce the dimension of the original feature vector into reduced form. And in the reinforcement learning, so reinforcement learning reinforcement learning does not generate any continuous output, but it will tell which output will be output will be awarded, or which output will be punished. Okay, so based on that we can generate some feedback, and it will be then again it will be sent to the input to for combination. If you have any questions from this part, you can ask me.
So from where we can study about this?
So you can study this part on artificial neural networks from there is a one book, S. Kumar. Okay, you can find this book in the library. There are other books on artificial neural networks which are also available in library. But I may suggest you to study these artificial neural networks from NPTEL slides, or NPTEL lectures are available.
Yes, sir.
Okay, they are freely available, so you can download from there. You can study by yourself. Okay. So in the next class, we will be discussing about perceptron and multi-layer perceptron. Any questions from this part? Okay, that's all for today.